A forgotten veteran's kindness sparks hope, but betrayal and doubt threaten to break him. Will his quiet heroism prevail? Like, subscribe, hit the bell. Stories that grip your soul. The morning sun barely crept over the horizon, painting the small town of Willow Creek in soft gold. At 68, Frank Sullivan moved through his routine like a clock wound decades ago. His one-bedroom apartment smelled of old wood and instant coffee, the kind he brewed in a chipped mug. His faded green army jacket hung on a hook by the door, its cuffs frayed from years of wear. Frank's hands, calloused and scarred, trembled slightly as he tied his boots, their leather cracked but polished. Willow Creek was quiet, its main street lined with mom-and-pop shops and a diner that still served pie for $1. Frank's grey hair was cropped short, his face etched with lines that told of battles fought and losses carried. His eyes, though tired, held a flicker of warmth like embers refusing to die. He'd been a mechanic in Vietnam, fixing jeeps under fire, but now he fixed neighbors' lawnmowers for free. Most days, he walked to the park, toolbox in hand, offering help to anyone who needed it. The townsfolk knew him as the Vet, a man who kept to himself but never turned away a broken thing. Frank's dreams had faded with time. Dreams of a family, a shop of his own, a life less solitary. His wife, Clara, had passed 10 years ago, and their only son lived across the country, too busy to visit. The war had left scars, not just on his body but in his soul, where guilt and memories festered. Yet Frank held fast to a quiet code. Do good, no matter the cost. Each morning, he'd pause at a small photo on his shelf. A younger Frank with his platoon, all grins and grit. "Still here, boys," he'd whisper, then head out to face another day. The park was his refuge, its oak trees whispering secrets only he could hear. He'd sit on a bench, watching kids play, their laughter a balm for wounds no one saw. But today, something felt different. The air carried a chill, and the sky hung heavy with clouds. Frank adjusted his jacket, its weight familiar, and set his toolbox by his feet. He didn't know it yet, but this day would test everything he believed in. A boy appeared, no older than 10, his sneakers scuffing the gravel path. His brown hair was a mess, his blue hoodie too big for his skinny frame. He clutched a crumpled letter, its edges worn as if he'd held it for days. Frank noticed the boy's eyes, wide, searching, like he was lost in more ways than one. The kid stopped near Frank's bench, staring at a rusty bicycle leaning against a tree. Its chain dangled, useless, and the boy kicked at the dirt, frustrated. Frank's instinct kicked in, the same one that had him patching up radios in the jungle. "Hey, kid," he called, voice gravelly but kind. "Need a hand with that bike?" The boy flinched, then nodded, wary but curious. Frank knelt beside the bike, his knees creaking, and opened his toolbox. The smell of oil and metal filled the air as he worked, his hands steady despite their tremble. The boy watched, silent, his letter still gripped tight. "Chain slipped," Frank said, not pushing for talk. "Won't take long." In minutes, the bike was whole again, its wheels spinning smooth. The boy's face lit up, a smile breaking through his guarded look. "Thanks, mister," he mumbled, barely audible. Frank waved it off. "No trouble. Ride safe, all right?" The boy hesitated, then tucked the letter into his pocket and pedaled away. Frank watched him go, a pang in his chest. Something about the kid reminded him of himself at that age, alone, carrying weight too big for small shoulders. He didn't know the boy's story, but he didn't need to. Helping felt right, like a promise kept to the men in that old photo. The park grew quiet again, leaves rustling in the breeze. Frank packed his tools, unaware that this small act had set something bigger in motion. The boy returned the next day, his bike wobbling but intact. Frank was back on his bench, sipping coffee from a thermos, the bitter taste grounding him. The kid didn't say much, just sat nearby kicking pebbles. Frank noticed the letter again, peeking from the boy's hoodie pocket. Its envelope was yellowed, stamped with faded ink. Official, maybe military. Frank's gut stirred, but he didn't pry. He'd learned long ago that some stories come out when they're ready. "Bike holding up?" Frank asked, keeping it light. The boy nodded. "Yeah, you're good at fixing stuff." Frank chuckled. "Been at it a while. You got a name, kid?" "Tommy," the boy said, eyes on the ground. Frank nodded, letting the silence sit. Tommy fidgeted, then pulled out the letter, holding it like a lifeline. "My dad, he was a soldier," Tommy said, voice small. "This is all I got from him." Frank's heart tightened. He knew that kind of loss, the kind that leaves holes no time can fill. Must be important, that letter, Frank said softly. Tommy shrugged, but his grip on the paper said otherwise. Frank didn't push. Instead, he handed Tommy a wrench from his toolbox. Want to learn how to tighten that chain yourself? Tommy's eyes brightened, and he took the wrench, its metal cool in his small hands. They worked together, Frank guiding without hovering. The park's sounds, birds, distant laughter, faded as they focused. Tommy's hands fumbled at first, but Frank was patient, his voice steady. There you go, Frank said as the chain clicked into place. You're a natural, Tommy grinned. A real one this time, and Frank felt something shift. It wasn't just about the bike. It was about trust, fragile but growing. The letter stayed in Tommy's pocket, its story untold but heavy. Frank respected that. He'd carried his own secrets long enough to know the value of silence. The park became their routine, a quiet rhythm of gravel crunching under Tommy's sneakers and Frank's steady steps. Each afternoon, Tommy would show up, his blue hoodie a little dirtier, his letter always tucked close. Frank brought his toolbox, its rusted hinges creaking, and they'd tinker. Bikes, skateboards, once even a wobbly park bench. The air smelled of cut grass and faint motor oil, grounding them both. Frank taught Tommy small tricks, how to patch a tire, how to spot a loose bolt. His voice was low, patient, like he was passing down something sacred. Tommy soaked it up, his small hands growing surer with each lesson. You're getting good at this, Frank said one day, wiping grease from his fingers. Tommy beamed, his usual guarded look softening. The letter came up again, not in words, but in glances. Frank noticed how Tommy's fingers brushed it when he spoke of his dad. Wrote this before he deployed, Tommy said once, voice barely above a whisper. Frank nodded, his own memories stirring, letters he'd sent Clara from Vietnam, promises he'd kept and ones he hadn't. He didn't push Tommy to share more. Instead, he handed him a screwdriver, its handle worn smooth. Let's fix that wobble on your front wheel, Frank said, keeping the moment light. They worked in comfortable silence, the park's oak trees swaying in the breeze. Tommy started asking questions, not about bikes, but about Frank. Were you scared? In the war, I mean. Frank paused, the weight of jungle heat and gunfire flashing in his mind. Every day, he admitted, but you keep going, for the guys next to you. Tommy's eyes widened, like he was piecing together his dad's world through Frank's words. The letter stayed in his pocket, but Frank felt its presence, a bridge between them. One afternoon, Tommy brought a photo, creased and faded, of a young soldier in desert camo. My dad, he said, voice proud but brittle. Frank studied the face, strong jaw, eyes like Tommy's. Looks like a good man, Frank said, and Tommy's smile was worth every ache in his knees. Their bond grew in these quiet moments, built on shared work and unspoken understanding. Frank didn't know it, but Tommy was starting to see him as more than the vet who fixed things. To the boy, Frank was proof that promises could still matter. The townsfolk of Willow Creek began to notice Frank and Tommy in the park. Some smiled, like Mrs. Carter from the diner, who'd waved through her window, her apron dusted with flour. That man's got a heart of gold, she'd say, pouring coffee for regulars. Others weren't so kind. Mr. Hargrove, who ran the hardware store, watched from his shop across the street, arms crossed. Frank's just fishing for attention, he muttered to a customer, always playing the hero. His words carried the sting of old grudges. Hargrove had never forgiven Frank for fixing a neighbor's gate for free, undercutting his business. Younger folks, scrolling phones outside the library, whispered too. He's just some old guy hanging around a kid, one said, smirking. Kinda weird, right? The skepticism spread like damp rot, fueled by small-town boredom. Frank felt the stares, but kept his focus on Tommy. He'd faced worse than gossip in foxholes and firefights. Still, the whispers hurt, each one a reminder of how alone he'd become. Mrs. Carter tried to defend him, her voice sharp at the diner. Frank Sullivan's done more for this town than half of you complainers. But her words didn't reach everyone. A few neighbours like the Wilsons brought Frank small jobs, a leaky faucet, a squeaky door, grateful for his help. Others, like Hargrove's buddies, turned away when Frank passed, their silence louder than words. Tommy noticed too, his young eyes catching the side glances. Why do they look at you like that? He asked one day, frowning. Frank shrugged, wiping down a wrench. Some folks don't trust what they don't understand, kid. Keep your head up. But inside, Frank felt the weight of their judgment. A betrayal, not just of him, but of the code he lived by. The town he'd served, the town he'd stayed for, seemed to be turning its back. He pushed the thought down, focusing on Tommy's eager hands learning to twist a bolt. But the whispers were only the beginning, a storm gathering just out of sight. The test came on a chilly Thursday, the sky grey and heavy with rain. Frank and Tommy were in the park, fixing a skateboard for one of Tommy's friends. The air smelled of wet leaves, and Frank's jacket was damp at the shoulders. A man approached. Mr. Larson, the town's self-appointed park overseer, his polo shirt crisp despite the weather. Larson had a clipboard and a scowl, his voice clipped. "Sullivan, you got a permit to be doing repairs out here?" Frank looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Permit? I'm just helping the kids, Larson." Larson's eyes narrowed. "This is public property. You can't run a workshop without authorization." Tommy froze, clutching the skateboard, his small frame tense. Frank kept his voice steady. "No workshop. Just fixing what's broken. Always have." Larson wasn't having it. "I've had complaints. People say you're a nuisance, loitering with kids." The word stung, and Frank's jaw tightened. He thought of Clara, how she'd always said his kindness was his strength. "I'm no nuisance," Frank said, standing. "And I'm not leaving these kids with broken things." Larson scribbled on his clipboard, his pen scratching like an accusation. "You'll stop, or I'll have the town council shut you down. Consider this a warning." Tommy's eyes darted to Frank, wide with worry. Frank forced a smile for the boy's sake. "Don't worry, kid. We'll figure it out." But as Larson walked away, Frank felt a crack in his resolve. He'd given up so much. His dreams, his health, his youth, for a country that now seemed to want him invisible. The park, his sanctuary, felt smaller, the oak trees less comforting. He finished the skateboard, handed it to Tommy's friend, and packed his tools. The rain started, cold and sharp, mirroring the ache in his chest. Frank had faced death in Vietnam, but this, being told his help wasn't wanted, felt like a different kind of wound. He walked home alone, the toolbox heavier than usual, Larson's words echoing. Was he really just a nuisance? The conflict grew like a fire fed by whispers. Hargrove's gossip at the hardware store turned venomous. "Frank's out there acting like a saint, but he's probably got an angle," he told a group of regulars, their nods egging him on. The younger crowd spun their own tales, posting on social media about the creepy vet hanging around the park. A local blog picked it up, twisting Frank's quiet work into something suspicious. "Concerned citizen questions unsupervised veterans' motives," the headline read. Frank saw it on a library computer, the words hitting like a punch. He hadn't asked for praise, but this was betrayal, not just by strangers but by the town he'd called home. Even Mrs. Carter's defense faltered. Some diner patrons stopped coming, wary of her support for Frank. Tommy felt the shift too. At school, kids teased him for hanging with the weird old guy. "Why don't you just stop going?" one classmate sneered. Tommy's fists clenched, but he didn't fight back. He kept showing up at the park, loyal despite the taunts. Frank noticed the boy's quieter demeanor, the way his shoulders slumped. "You okay, Tommy?" he asked one evening, the park empty under a fading sunset. Tommy shrugged, kicking dirt. "They say stuff about you, about us. I don't care, but..." His voice trailed off, and Frank's heart sank. He'd wanted to shield Tommy, not drag him into this mess. The town council meeting loomed, where Larson planned to push for a ban on unauthorized repairs in public spaces. Flyers went up, calling for community safety, and Frank's name was whispered in the fine print. He walked past one on a lamppost, its edges curling in the wind. The betrayal stung deeper than any war wound. His own people, turning his kindness into a crime. Frank's resolve wavered, the photo of his platoon flashing in his mind. Had he kept going all these years just to end up here, doubted and discarded? The park felt colder now, the oak trees silent, as if they too had turned away. The rain fell harder now, soaking Frank's faded army jacket as he sat on his park bench. His hands, clenched tight, trembled not from cold, but from a breaking heart. The town council meeting was tonight, and Larson's push to ban his repairs felt like a guillotine. "Why does it matter?" Frank muttered, voice cracking, the words lost in the downpour. He'd fixed things for decades, asked for nothing, yet here he was, a villain in his own town. The park was empty, the oak trees dripping, their whispers gone. Tommy hadn't shown up today, and the absence gnawed at Frank. Had the boy's loyalty finally cracked under the town's venom? Frank's eyes stung, not from rain but from doubt. Had he been wrong to care? To believe kindness could outlast cruelty? He pictured Clara's smile, her voice saying, "You're enough, Frank." But Clara was gone, and the town's betrayal felt like fate spitting in his face. His toolbox sat by his feet, rusted and heavy. a symbol of everything he'd tried to be. "I just wanted to help," he whispered, head bowed, the rain hiding his tears. The weight of 68 years, war, loss, solitude, crashed down. Was this his legacy, to be forgotten like the men in his platoon photo? The council meeting loomed, and Frank felt smaller than ever, a man out of time. The next day, Tommy was still gone. Frank waited in the park, his thermos of coffee cold, the bench slick with rain. The boy's absence was a knife, twisting deeper with each passing hour. He'd seen Tommy's bike by the park yesterday, but no sign of the kid. The letter, the photo, the trust they'd built. Had it all meant nothing? Frank's mind raced. Had Tommy's mum pulled him away, spooked by the gossip? Or had the boy himself given up, tired of defending a creepy vet? The park felt hollow, its gravel paths too quiet without Tommy's sneakers. Frank's chest ached, not just for the boy, but for the hope he'd dared to feel. He'd let Tommy in, shared pieces of his war stories, his pain. Now, that openness felt like a mistake, another loss to carry. He walked home, the toolbox dragging, each step heavier than the last. The diner's lights glowed, but Frank didn't stop. Mrs. Carter's kind words couldn't fix this. He was alone again. The town's judgment a wall he couldn't climb. Had he been naive, thinking one old man could make a difference? The question burned, unanswered, as the rain kept falling. The town's condemnation hit like a storm. At the council meeting, Larson stood at the podium, his voice smug. "We can't have unsupervised veterans loitering in our parks," he said, eyes flicking to Frank in the back row. The room buzzed. Some nodded, others whispered, their words sharp. "He's trouble," one woman hissed, "always acting like he's above us." Hargrove chimed in, his hardware store cronies backing him. "Frank's just milking his vet status for pity," he sneered. The blog post had spread, now, with comments calling Frank unstable, a risk. Frank sat silent, his jacket damp, hands folded to hide their shake. Mrs. Carter tried to speak up. "He's a good man," but was drowned out by jeers. The council voted no repairs without a permit, effective immediately. Frank's work, his purpose, was outlawed in a single night. Outside, flyers mocked him, one taped to a lamppost. "Keep our parks safe." Kids laughed, pointing as he passed, their cruelty a fresh wound. The betrayal was complete. Not just neighbours, but the system he'd fought for. He'd survived Vietnam, but this felt like defeat. Was his kindness a fool's errand, mocked by the very people he'd served? Frank's steps faltered, the town he loved now a stranger's land. Alone in his apartment, Frank sat at his small table, the photo of his platoon before him. The young faces stared back, frozen in time, men who'd trusted him, men he'd failed to save. His fingers traced the frame, its wood worn smooth by years of touch. "I'm sorry, boys," he whispered, voice hoarse. The guilt of surviving when they hadn't had never left him. But Clara's voice echoed too, faint but clear. "You carry them by living well." Frank's eyes fell to his toolbox, rusted but loyal, like him. He thought of Tommy, the boy's wide eyes when he spoke of his dad. That letter, that photo, they weren't just relics, they were a promise, like the one Frank made to his platoon. He'd vowed to keep going, to honour them through small, steady acts. The town's cruelty stung, but hadn't he faced worse? Jungle ambushes, shrapnel, screams in the dark, yet he'd kept moving. Tommy's absence hurt, but Frank wouldn't give up on him. Not yet. He stood, slow but sure, and touched the photo once more. "One more day," he told the faces. "For you, for him." The resolve flickered, fragile but alive, a spark in the dark. Frank didn't know what tomorrow held, but he'd show up, toolbox in hand. The next morning, Frank trudged to the park, his army jacket heavy with rain. His toolbox clinked, a stubborn act of defiance against the council's ban. The oak trees stood silent, but a figure waited on his bench. A woman, mid-30s, her dark hair tied back. She held Tommy's crumpled letter, her eyes red but steady. "You're Frank Sullivan?" she asked, voice soft but firm. Frank nodded, wary, his heart bracing for more rejection. "I'm Lisa, Tommy's mom," she said. "He's been talking about you non-stop." Frank's breath caught. Lisa handed him the letter, its ink faded but legible. "My husband, Tommy's dad, wrote this before he died in Iraq," she said. "He was a mechanic like you. Promised Tommy he'd teach him to fix things." Frank's hands shook as he read, a soldier's words, full of love, urging his son to be kind, to keep learning. "Tommy said you're keeping that promise," Lisa continued, her voice breaking. Frank's throat tightened. He'd thought Tommy had abandoned him, but the boy had been sharing his story, fighting for him in his own way. Lisa explained, Tommy was grounded for sneaking out to the park, but he'd begged her to find Frank. You gave him hope, she said, something I couldn't. The revelation hit like sunlight through clouds. Frank's small acts had mattered, had honoured a fallen soldier's wish. He wasn't just fixing bikes, he was carrying a legacy. The park felt alive again, the gravel crunching with purpose. Frank barely had time to process when Mrs. Carter burst into the park, waving a newspaper. Frank, you gotta see this, she shouted, her apron flapping. The front page screamed, Local veteran targeted by unfair ban. Lisa had contacted a reporter, and Tommy's story about Frank's kindness had sparked outrage. The article detailed Frank's Vietnam service, his Bronze Star, his quiet decades of helping Willow Creek. It quoted Tommy, He's like my dad, fixing things and never giving up. Frank's eyes stung as he read, the words a lifeline. By noon, the park filled with people, not to judge, but to support. The Wilsons brought coffee, their kids holding signs. Thank you, Frank. Even some of Hargrove's cronies showed, heads low, mumbling apologies. Larson arrived, flustered, his clipboard useless against the crowd. The council's reconsidering the ban, he stammered, but no one listened. The reporter was there, snapping photos, and Lisa stood by Frank, her hand on Tommy's shoulder. The boy had slipped his grounding, his hoodie damp but his grin wide. You didn't quit, Tommy said, hugging Frank, the letter safe in his pocket. Frank hugged back, tears falling freely now. The town's cruelty had crumbled, exposed as petty against his steady heart. Hargrove stayed away, his store quiet, his gossip shamed into silence. Frank felt Clara's presence, her voice whispering, You're enough. The park roared with cheers, a community righting its wrong. Willow Creek changed that day, the park becoming a symbol of second chances. The council not only lifted the ban, but named a corner Sullivan's Spot, where anyone could bring broken things for repair. Kids flocked to Frank, not just for fixes, but for stories, his war tales, his lessons on resilience. Mrs. Carter started a veterans breakfast at the diner, free for any vet, funded by donations. The Wilsons organised a tool drive, filling Frank's toolbox with gleaming wrenches. Even the library, once a hub of gossip, hosted a living history night, where Frank spoke about Vietnam, his voice steady as Tommy sat in the front row. The blog that smeared him posted a retraction, buried under comments praising Frank. Lisa and Tommy became family, their small house a regular stop for Frank's coffee and stories. The town's youth, once mocking, now asked to learn from him, their phones swapped for screwdrivers. Frank's solitude faded, replaced by faces that saw him not as the vet, but as a man who'd never stopped fighting for good. The oak trees seemed to nod, their whispers now of pride. Willow Creek learned that kindness, however quiet, could reshape a community, one fixed bike at a time. Frank's legacy grew beyond the park, his story spreading through news and word of mouth. Veterans from nearby towns visited, sharing their own tales, finding solace in Frank's listening ear. Lisa and Tommy started a scholarship in Tommy's dad's name for kids of fallen soldiers, with Frank as its first mentor. The first recipient, a shy teen with a knack for engines called Frank, the reason I didn't give up. At schools, Frank spoke to kids, his voice soft but sure. You don't need to be loud to be strong, he'd say, Tommy nodding beside him. A viral video captured him teaching a girl to fix a skate, her laugh echoing his own joy. Frank's apartment, once a shrine to loss, now held new photos. Tommy, Lisa, the park crowd. His platoon's picture stayed central, but now it felt like a promise kept, not a burden. The guilt of surviving eased. Frank was living well for them, for Tommy, for himself. Willow Creek's veterans, once invisible, found voice, their stories no longer fading. Frank's quiet heroism proved that one man's goodness could ripple, mending more than machines. He'd found peace not in applause, but in the hands he'd lifted, the hearts he'd touched. The sun set over Willow Creek, painting the park in warm gold. Frank sat on his bench, toolbox at his feet, Tommy beside him, tinkering with a bike chain. The oak trees rustled, their whispers soft, like Clara's voice, like his platoon's laughter. Frank's jacket, still frayed, felt lighter now, its weight shared by a town that finally saw him. He touched the letter in his pocket. Tommy had given him a copy, a soldier's words to carry forward. Keep showing up, it read, and Frank had through war, loss, and doubt. The park hummed with life. Kids playing, neighbours waving, the air sweet with cut grass. Frank smiled, his eyes bright, the embers of hope now a steady flame. Heroes don't always roar. Sometimes they fix what's broken, quietly, faithfully. What moved you most? Share in the comments, hit like, subscribe. Don't miss stories that remind us what matters.